I put off telling this story because it's the one I've sat with the longest, the one I've turned over the most times, the one that has resisted every framework I've tried to fit it into, and that I've eventually stopped trying to fit and have simply learned to carry. It's not frightening, I want to say that first, because it has the shape of something frightening and I don't want that shape to misrepresent what it actually was. It was not frightening. It was the strangest thing that has ever happened to me, and it contained, at its center, a quality I was not expecting, and that I have carried like something useful ever since. This happened about 6 years ago now. I was living alone in a house, a rented house, nothing special. A 2-story place in a neighborhood I liked for its trees and its quiet and its proximity to a coffee shop where I did most of my reading. I was going through a period I can only describe as uncertain, not a crisis, nothing dramatic, just that feeling that arrives sometimes in the middle of an adult life when you look around at the shape of things and find that you're not entirely sure how you got to where you are or whether the direction you're pointed in is the right one. The particular quiet vertigo of a life that is by all visible measures fine, but that feels somehow not quite correctly calibrated to who you actually are. It was a Wednesday night in November. I know it was Wednesday because I had been at a standing weekly dinner with friends and had come home around 10, full and slightly tired and in the particular mood of someone who has had a good evening and is now ready to let it settle into sleep. I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, sat with it for a while in the kitchen, and was heading upstairs when the knock came. Not the doorbell. A knock. 3 firm knocks, evenly spaced, the kind that are not hurried and not tentative. The knock of someone who is sure they're at the right door and is prepared to wait for it to be answered. It was 10:30 on a Wednesday night in November. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and thought about who it could be. Not a neighbor, none of whom knocked at 10:30. Not a delivery, not at that hour. I went to the door. I want to tell you what happened when I opened it as plainly as I can and without embellishment, because the plainness is the important part. I opened the door, and there was a man standing on my porch in the pool of light from the porch fixture. He was wearing a jacket I recognized as one of my own. His height was my height. His build was my build. His face was my face. Not similar to mine, not resembling mine. Mine, the same way that your face in a mirror is yours, not approximate, not close, not the face of a brother or a cousin or someone who happened to share certain features. My face, my specific face with the specific configuration of features that I have looked at in mirrors my whole life, and that I know the way you only know your own face, with a kind of cellular certainty that is different from recognizing anyone else. I stood in my open doorway and I looked at myself standing on my porch, and I want to be honest about the fact that I did not react the way you might expect. I did not scream. I did not slam the door. I did not faint. I stood there and I looked and I felt the particular kind of stillness that arrives when something happens that is so far outside the available categories that the brain simply pauses, stops reaching for the next thing to do, and waits. He looked at me. I looked at him, and then he said in my voice, "I know this is strange. I'm sorry to knock so late. Can I come in?" The voice was mine, not an imitation of my voice, not an approximation. Mine, with its specific texture and pitch, and the particular way I have of slightly dropping the end of a sentence that I've been told about and that I can hear in recordings of myself and that I heard now, coming out of this person who was me, standing on my porch, asking to come in. I said yes. I stepped back. He came inside. I closed the door behind him, and we stood in my front hallway, looking at each other under the hallway light, 2 versions of the same face, and I was aware of a quality in the encounter that I had not expected, which was that it was not frightening. I want to keep saying that because I think it bears repeating. There was no menace, no wrong quality to the air, no sense of something threatening. The closest I can come to describing the emotional texture of that moment is that it felt like running into someone you haven't seen in a long time, in an unexpected place. The slight disorientation of the out-of-context encounter combined with a warmth of recognition, that specific combination, disorienting and warm at once. We went into the kitchen. I made tea because making tea was something to do with my hands, and because the ritual of it seemed useful. and because he sat down at my kitchen table with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything was, which of course he would. I set a mug in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it the same way I wrap my hands around a mug, which is with both hands, which is a specific and habitual thing I do. I sat across from him. I said, "What is this?" Not a question exactly, or not a question expecting a conventional answer, more like naming the room we were in together. He said, "I don't have a complete answer for you. I don't fully understand the mechanism of it myself. What I can tell you is that I'm you, or I'm a version of you, or I'm something that has enough of you in it to look and sound the way I do." He paused. "That's as accurate as I can get," I said. "Where are you from?" He said, "From here, more or less." He said, "The from is the part that's hard to explain. The distance is not exactly spatial." He said, "I've been here before, meaning in this particular life, this particular shape of things." He said some things can move in directions that aren't the ones you're used to, and he was one of those things on this particular night. I sat with that, and I said, "Why are you here?" He looked at me across the kitchen table. He had my eyes. He had the specific quality my eyes have in low light, which is darker than they are in bright light, and which I know from photographs. He looked at me with my own eyes, and he said, "Because you're in the middle of something hard right now, and I know what the end of it looks like, and I wanted to come and tell you that it resolves. Not how it resolves, just that it does." I said, "The uncertain period." He said, "Yes." I said, "It gets better?" He said, "It gets clear." Which is better than better? Better means an improvement in something that was insufficient. Clear means you find the thing that was always true and start living in it. He said, "Those are different, and clarity is the better of the two." I thought about that for a while. I thought about the uncertain period, the quiet vertigo, the feeling of being not quite correctly calibrated. I thought about the shape of a life that is fine, but not yet right. I thought about this person across from me who had my face and my voice and who was telling me with the certainty of someone who had already been through this that the not yet right would become right, not through improvement but through clarity. I said, "Can you tell me anything specific about how it resolves?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think if I told you the specifics it would change the specifics, and the way it actually resolves is the right way, and I don't want to interfere with that." He said, "I know that's not satisfying, but I think the most I can tell you that's actually useful is that it resolves, and that the clarity, when it comes, will feel like recognizing something you already knew rather than learning something new." He paused. "It'll feel like Harlow." I sat with that. He said it with the knowledge that I would know what he meant by Harlow because, of course, he did, because he'd been there, and he knew that particular feeling of recognition and ease. And using it as a reference point was efficient and precise in the way that only someone who shared your full internal library of reference could be. I said, "You been to Harlow?" He said, "I told you, I've been here before." We sat for a while after that in the kitchen with our tea, not talking, and that silence had the quality I remembered from Harlow actually. That specific, settled, unhurried ease of being somewhere that knows you and has made room for you. Being in a room with yourself, I discovered, has a particular quality of comfort that I had not anticipated. There was nothing to perform, no management of another person's perception, no gap between who I was and who I was appearing to be. I was entirely known across the table, and it was the most relaxed I had felt in that entire uncertain period. Eventually, I said, "Do I have questions I should be asking that I'm not asking?" He smiled. It was my smile. He said, "You're asking the right things in the right order. That's one of the things that doesn't change." He said, "I should go." I said, "When will the clarity come?" He said, "Sooner than you think and later than you want, which is how these things always go." He stood. I stood. We walked to the front door together, and I opened it, and the porch was the dark November night. And the street was quiet, and the trees were doing their late November thing, bare and patient. He turned on the threshold, and he looked at me one more time with my own eyes, that darker quality they have in low light. He said, "You're doing better than you think you are. I want you to know that. The uncertain period feels like failure, and it isn't. It's adjustment. It's the calibration finding itself." He said good night. I said good night. He stepped off the porch and walked down the path to the sidewalk, and I watched him go until he turned at the end of the block and was gone. I closed the door. I went back to the kitchen and washed the 2 mugs. I went upstairs and lay in the dark for a long time thinking about what had just happened, and at some point I fell asleep, and in the morning the house was exactly as it always was, and Wednesday had become Thursday, and the uncertain period was still there, but had a slightly different quality to it, the way something looks different when you know it has an end. I want to tell you that the clarity came. About 8 months after that November night, something shifted, not a single event, more like a gradual coming into focus, a series of small things aligning in a direction that felt for the first time in a long time like the right direction. I made some changes, not dramatic ones, adjustments, and what arrived on the other side of those adjustments was something I can only describe as clarity, the recognition of something that had always been true that I had not been living in. Exactly what he said it would feel like. Exactly like Harlow. I've thought about that night many times since. I've thought about what the other version of me was, what the mechanism of it could possibly be, whether there's any framework in any of the things human beings have thought about the nature of time and possibility that accounts for a man who contains the same specific face and voice and reference library as you turning up on your porch at 10:30 on a Wednesday to tell you that things resolve. I've read some things. I haven't found the framework. I've stopped looking for it. What I have instead is the memory, the kitchen, the tea, the particular ease of a silence with someone who knows you completely. The face across the table that was mine, the eyes in the low light, the good night on the threshold, and the thing he told me which I carry like something useful, which I take out and look at when the uncertain periods come around again because they do come around. They're a feature of a life rather than a malfunction. And what helps in them is what he told me. You're doing better than you think you are. The uncertain period feels like failure, and it isn't. It's adjustment. It's the calibration finding itself. The clarity comes. It feels like recognizing something you always knew. It feels like Harlow. Sleep well tonight, wherever you are in the shape of your life right now. Whether it's clear or uncertain, whether it's resolved or in the middle of resolving, you're doing better than you think you are. That's the thing I most wanted to tell you. Across all 30 of these nights, you're doing better than you think you are. Good night.